Hello, everyone. I'm Frederica Whitfield in for Kate Baldwin. Thanks so much for joining me. Right now, we are getting a brand new update on the path and the strength of Hurricane Dorian, the powerful storm that looks like it is headed straight towards Florida. The National Hurricane Center has just issued its latest advisory, and at the moment, all signs point to this being a major hurricane. The entire state of Florida is on alert as Dorian approaches. The governor has already declared a state of emergency, and stores are reporting empty shelves as residents stock up on food, water, and medical supplies. Let's get straight to the new forecast. CNN's Chad Myers joins us right now. Chad, what are you seeing?
I'm afraid, Fred, that it isn't good. Now we're up to a Category 4 hurricane, a low end 4, but irrelevant, 130 miles per hour. That's Sunday morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. Here's Labor Day morning, 8 o'clock, still a Category 4, 130 miles per hour. The cone anywhere from about Key Biscayne on up, still into the Jacksonville area possible because of the possible turn that this could make as it gets closer to the shore. It is going to slow down for sure. This is 24 hours, literally from the coast to Orlando in 24 hours. You could probably walk there in 24 hours, and that's the heavy rain potential all the way through the entire peninsula of Florida, because this will not be a compact storm when it gets there. It has 96 hours to gain strength in very warm water. We're now seeing the Hurricane Hunter aircraft fly through it at 89 miles per hour at the surface, slightly higher at flight level. So what else has been here in the past? There's Dorian, there's Francis, Irma, Jean, Hugo, all of those passing within about 60 nautical miles of where we are right now. The American model taking it farther to the north, closer to the Space Coast. The European model taking it farther down to the south, not quite to Miami-Dade, certainly, but then turning it up toward the right and up the peninsula of Florida. I think the Hurricane Center is kind of taking somewhere down the middle of what the true consensus of the models, because there are many others out there. The true consensus of the model is where they're putting their new cone out there. It's an impressive looking storm. It's too far away to show you on radar because the only closest radar would be Puerto Rico, and now that would be above its radar beam. Fred.
Oh boy. All right. Thanks so much, Chad. We'll check back with you as needed. So people across Florida are preparing for the worst as Hurricane Dorian approaches. CNN's Nick Valencia is in Daytona Beach. So Nick, what are you seeing there? How are people preparing?
It is beautiful today, Frederica, Daytona Beach, another typical day here, but this is not expected to last. This weekend will be disrupted by what is expected to be a major Category 4 storm, and people here seem to be taking the warning seriously. The governor just gave a press conference a little while ago reminding people that there was about 10 years that Florida did not take a direct hit from a hurricane, but out of the last 4 years, they've been impacted by 5 major storms. I mentioned people are taking it seriously. We're already starting to see those long lines at the gas station. We're seeing people filling up their sandbags as well as gathering plywood to board up either their businesses or their residences. This is going to be a very serious thing, and that's what officials are stressing to anyone that lives up and down the East Coast, especially of Florida. Right now, it's not quite clear where this will make direct landfall, but officials are being very clear and direct. If you live anywhere along the East Coast of Florida, you need to be ready for anything to happen. Frederica?
Of course. All right, Nick Valencia, thank you so much. I'm joined now by the mayor of West Palm Beach, Florida, Mayor Keith James. Mayor James, good to see you. So you could be facing a direct hit from a Category 4, possibly hurricane. What are you most concerned about right now?
Well, our primary concerns certainly are the lives of our residents, and we are hoping for the best, but we're preparing for the worst. And we have been encouraging people, even since yesterday, to get prepared, get water, get gas, get cash out of the ATMs. And the more we hear about this storm, it sounds like this is a serious one.
The governor, DeSantis, had put out a statement, in fact, saying every Floridian should have 7 days of food, water, and medicine. Are you confident that people will be doing that? Because we know there's always a problem with complacency when there's a threat of an incoming storm.
We are cautiously optimistic that people are heeding the advice. This is not our first rodeo, if you will, with storms. Francis and Jean hit us a few years ago around the same time of year. We as a city prepare for hurricanes all year round. We have an emergency operations center that is at level 2 activation, and I believe that our citizens will heed the warning. We're encouraging people, understand what your evacuation zones are, and if you are advised to evacuate, evacuate.
Okay, and thus far, where are we on evacuations?
We haven't finished that determination yet. We're continuing to monitor the track of the storm so that we could get a better idea. But probably by tomorrow morning, we will have a specific idea as to which of those zones we should be evacuating.
Mm-hmm. You were a city commissioner when Hurricane Irma hit in 2017. Is there something you learned from that experience that you want to apply here?
Well, I think what I learned is that, unfortunately, the worst is after the storm. We are concerned about flooding. We're concerned about winds. We're concerned about rain. But a lot of times the worst is after the storm, where people are without power. And we hope that people have enough food. Folks are living in shelters. And sometimes it takes a while to get back up and going. And so we hope that people will be patient with the process. But that is what I learned, is that a lot of times the real difficulties of these storms is not during the storm, it's the aftermath.
Right. And usually among the most vulnerable homeless people, the elderly, what do you do, or what special preparations are being made for them?
We have shelters. We're opening shelters. If people have special needs, they have to register for those shelters. Another lesson that we learned back from Irma in 2017 is how vulnerable some of these assisted living homes are and nursing homes. We are already sending out teams of police and fire to check on those facilities now to make sure that they have generators in place in case of an outage. We don't want a repeat of some of the horror stories, and I'm sure you heard from other communities in 2017 where folks literally died from heat exposure. So we're trying to anticipate, prepare for that now, and sending people out to talk with the owners of the facilities to make sure that they are prepared for what will be a tremendous catastrophe, probably.
All right, Mayor Keith James of West Palm Beach, Florida, we wish you the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your interest in our communities.
Coming up, President Trump considering blocking $250 million in military aid to Ukraine. It's a move the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee called destructive to our national security. Details on that straight ahead. Plus, the Trump administration now targeting families of some U.S. service members overseas, making it harder for their kids to become U.S. citizens. But why? Stay with us. President Trump is mulling a plan that would likely get the approval of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Sources tell CNN that Trump is considering blocking $250 million in U.S. military aid to the Ukraine, a move that could be met with bipartisan backlash from those who see U.S. aid as essential to pushing back against Russia's military involvement. This comes on the heels of Trump's controversial remarks about Russia at the G7 summit. He downplayed Moscow's intervention in Ukraine and suggested that Putin be reinstated as a G7 leader. CNN White House reporter Jeremy Diamond joining me right now. So, Jeremy, what more are you hearing?
That's right, Frederica. Multiple sources are now telling CNN that the president is seriously considering blocking that $250 million in military aid to Ukraine. This was aid that was previously approved by Congress for this fiscal year, and the Trump administration has now placed that aid under review. And if it doesn't go forward with approving that aid in coming weeks, effectively that aid will be blocked and will not go to Ukraine. One source is telling us that the White House has already begun to notify relevant agencies and congressional committees about its intentions to block that aid, but the source is stressing that the president hasn't yet made a final decision. As you mentioned, Frederica, all of this comes on the heels of the president suggesting that he would like to include Russia into the G8, which is currently the G7, following Russia's annexation of Crimea in Ukraine. And obviously, U.S. support for Ukraine and this military aid is often viewed as a fairly key barometer of U.S. support for Ukraine Ukraine, and also, of course, of its efforts to counter Russian influence and aggression in the region. So a lot of questions about that. Now, next week, the president is set to meet with the Ukrainian president for the first time, the newly elected Ukrainian president. So we'll see if that meeting perhaps changes the president's mind at all. But right now, we've already seen a lot of criticism from Democratic lawmakers, and we are sure to expect that some Republican lawmakers will also object to this move. Support for Ukraine has been fairly bipartisan in Congress, and this could be a very controversial move. Frederica?
Indeed. All right, Jeremy Diamond, thank you so much from the White House. Appreciate it. All right, joining me right now, former Pentagon and State Department spokesman, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. Good to see you. He's also now a CNN military and diplomatic analyst. So on Ukraine, is there any military reason why this would make sense?
It's really hard to make that case, Fred. Even though ceasefire violations and some of the fighting has decreased over the summer, particularly since last month, there is still fighting between Ukrainian forces and these Russian-backed separatists. Not to mention the fact that since 2014, the Russians have almost tripled, up to around more than 30,000, the number of troops they have in Crimea, and they become more aggressive in the Black Sea, in and around the Black Sea with their Navy moves. So, no, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a military perspective at all.
So the president seems to be going out of his way, if you will, to make this kind of friendly gesture to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
I mean, at the core, what is going on here?
Well, that's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly what President Trump is thinking, but I don't think, just sitting back as you and I are, you have to view this in context of other things going on right now. As Jeremy just reported, his interest in bringing Russia back into the G8, or what would be the G8, when he was in France, making that case in France, which apparently got pretty testy with the other G6 partners, G7 partners. But also, you have to keep it in context of the decision that this administration has taken to review all foreign aid and assistance and to try to cut back from foreign aid and assistance in general. So it kind of fits his mode of, A, I don't like foreign aid and assistance, and B, I like Vladimir Putin and I don't want to be so tough on Russia. But it's really hard to know exactly what's in his mind in terms of the timing right now. Back to your first question, which is the most relevant question. Does this make sense from a military perspective and from our obligations to support Ukraine, because their territorial integrity is still being violated every day by Russia, and there is still fighting by Russian-backed forces against the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian armed forces. So it mathematically just doesn't make any sense.
So separate from this, former Defense Secretary James Mattis spoke to Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic for a piece that posted this morning.
Yeah.
And what was most notable in your view about what he wouldn't say? He wouldn't elaborate on the president per se. He did talk about a so-called, duty of silence. But Mattis also said, this, and let me quote now, he says, there is a period in which I owe my silence. It's not eternal. It's not going to be forever.
Right.
End quote. End quote. So at what point do you believe he will kind of break that silence?
I don't know. Only Jim Mattis knows whether and when he'll ever break his silence and talk more candidly
is it
about
deference to
President
the
Trump.
sitting president?
But it is. Look, so it's a very personal decision when you're a cabinet official, when you leave office, about whether you're going to write a memoir or not, whether you're going to do a lot of media and speeches a lot. How candid are you going to be about the administration you left? Some are very candid. And Bob Gates, when he was Secretary of Defense, wrote a very candid memoir called Duty. Leon Panetta wrote a very candid, forthright memoir when he left. I've worked for cabinet officials who chose to do it, and I've worked for some who chose not to. One of them, in fact, a couple of years ago told me, not only am I not going to write a memoir, but I don't think that I'm making my successor's job any easier by being out there in the media space very much. So he also eschews a lot of media interviews and speaking opportunities. It's a personal decision. I know we all would like to hear more from Secretary Mattis about his time working for President Trump, but we need to respect his own prerogatives. It's not an obligation that he has to tell all. He has an opportunity to do that to the degree that he's comfortable with. And I think, knowing Secretary Mattis the way I do, that you're not going to see him open up very much over time, even after the administration is out of power. I just don't see this being the kind of thing that he's going to be very, very forthright about.
Except he's dangled some pretty enticing carrots, by the bit that he has revealed.
He has, Fred, and that's been disappointing to me. Just seeing that he's sort of teasing to some of his views, but he won't actually come out and say it. And I don't know how much this book, which was started before he became Secretary of Defense, it was supposed to be about leadership. I don't know how much it's actually going to reveal about his time as Secretary of Defense, not only just about Trump, but just in terms of just being Secretary of Defense. So I do find that disappointing that he's sort of teasing this out here, but he won't go all the extra mile and sort of explain exactly what he's thinking.
Yeah. Admiral John Kirby, always good to see you. Thanks so much.
You too, Fred. Thanks.
All right, coming up, the U.S. Justice Department's Inspector General releasing a long-awaited report on former FBI Director James Comey, a report on how he handled memos about his meetings with President Trump. Now Comey says an apology would be nice. Next.
Attention, IHOP.
The U.S. Department of Justice's Inspector General says former FBI Director James Comey broke FBI policy by sharing memos he wrote on meetings with President Trump back in 2017. CNN's Sarah Murray joining me right now. So, Sarah, you've been digging through this 83-page report from the DOJ's Inspector General, and what have you found?
Well, it basically says that James Comey, the former FBI director, violated FBI policies in the way that he retained and handled these memos. And remember, these were the memos that were documenting his interactions with President Trump, which James Comey found alarming, and then he shared them with one of his friends, who then shared them with members of the media. And so the report goes on to essentially say that Comey set a dangerous example in the way that he shared this information, not only for all of the current FBI employees, but for all of the former FBI employees who are taught to carefully guard information about what is going on at the FBI, about potentially ongoing investigations, about communications there. It also cites, quotes from a number of Comey's advisors saying they were stunned, they were shocked, they were disappointed in the way that Comey reacted to this. So certainly not a positive portrayal of how the former FBI director conducted himself.
So the report says it wasn't classified information, but it was confidential. Meantime, James Comey is already talking. What is he saying?
Well, he is latching on to a part of this report that says that what Comey shared with the media was not the classified portion in any of these memos. And so Comey's coming out essentially and defending himself on Twitter and saying, see, I'm not a leaker. And here's what he said. I don't need a public apology from those who defamed me, but a quick message with a sorry we lied about you would be nice. And to all those who spent 2 years talking about me going to jail or being a liar and a leaker, ask yourselves why you still trust people who gave you bad info for so long, including the president.
Okay, and breaking policy or sharing, confidential information is not something worth prosecuting.
Well, they referred this, the Inspector General referred this to the Department of Justice and said essentially it is up to you if you guys decide you want to prosecute this. And what the Justice Department did was they decided not to. They said it was not clear from the evidence that James Comey had actually intended to violate this policy about handling classified information. And so ultimately DOJ decided the evidence just was not there to actually bring charges against James Comey. So while this, may be a pretty tough report to read about the way he conducted himself, DOJ decided ultimately it wasn't criminal.
Sarah Murray, thanks so much. A new Trump administration policy will make it harder for children born to some military members serving overseas to become U.S. citizens. There's a lot of confusion around this policy. Exactly who will be impacted and why is the change being made?
We call it the mother's.
Into CNN, the Department of Homeland Security is blocking House Oversight Committee staff from visiting immigration facilities. In a letter to the DHS, committee members argue that this action goes against a pledge from DHS to welcome congressional inspections and to have open dialogue about improving conditions. CNN's Lauren Fox joining me right now. So what are you learning, Lauren?
Well, we know that House Oversight Committee Chairman Elijah Cummings sent this letter to DHS basically arguing that congressional staffers were blocked from visiting 11 CBP facilities, trying to look at the conditions within those facilities. And in the letter, Cummings writes, quote, the department's last-minute denial of access to CBP facilities and unwarranted restrictions at ICE facilities are unacceptable and impair the committee's ability to conduct its oversight responsibilities in an effective effective manner. The committee requests that the department provide meaningful access to all facilities identified by committee staff. And they are saying that this came after committee staff visited some facilities last week and found some troubling conditions. I want to just read to you a few of those conditions that they found. They said that children were not given age-appropriate food in some conditions. They also said there was a lack of diapers for parents and that children were placed in cold rooms without adequate clothing on. And there was one more observation that one staffer wrote down, saying one detainee alleged that a Border Patrol agent told a child who had spilled soup that the child would not receive more food unless that child drank the spilled soup off the floor. And as you know, this is part of Democrats' operation to try to get more information about what's going on in these facilities. Sometimes they have been, as in this case, blocked from being able to even get in. Frederica?
Okay, so what potentially is next?
Well, I think that's unclear at this point. I mean, obviously, the Democrats are very concerned about the lack of access here. That is what Cummings is trying to get to the bottom of. He wants to make sure that his staffers are able to get in and actually see these facilities. But you can expect that there will be more letters exchanged, perhaps, and we'll be waiting to hear what DHS has to say in response. Frederica?
All right. Lauren Fox, thank you so much. And a new policy from the Trump administration is making it harder for children of some U.S. military members living overseas to claim citizenship. The rule affects children of naturalized U.S. citizens who are serving abroad if their parents have lived in the U.S. for less than 5 years. While this doesn't make anyone ineligible for U.S. citizenship, it does create a hurdle and a lot of worries for these military families. CNN senior national correspondent Alex Marquardt is here with me now. So, Alex, what exactly does this new rule do?
Well, Fred, there was a lot of confusion when this rule was announced yesterday, and what USCIS, which is the Citizenship and Immigration Services, is saying is that this is a policy that is being put into place to align it with the State Department policy. But essentially, Fred, who this is affecting directly are new naturalized U.S. citizens who are serving in the military or the government overseas, as well as people who are not yet U.S. citizens, who are trying to become U.S. citizens and are doing so while they serve the United States government overseas. So imagine you are someone who has been deployed overseas and you have just become a U.S. citizen in the last few years. Or, as there are thousands of cases of, you are a not yet U.S. citizen serving in the military overseas. If you have a child overseas, that child will not automatically become a U.S. citizen. As parents, you will have to then apply for that child to become a U.S. citizen. It doesn't make them ineligible, as you said, but it adds a process. It's a long and arduous process to apply for American citizenship, of course, and one that a lot of parents don't necessarily want to undertake. Now, the administration is downplaying the number of people who are affected by this. The Department of Defense says it's around 100 people per year. USCIS just said on a phone call a short while ago that it's just a handful of people. But that's kind of beyond the point. If you look at this carefully, the people who are being affected are people who are not born in the U.S., who are not citizens from birth. And that is going to create a lot of fear and concern among people who are serving the United States, oftentimes in harm's way. Fred, I was speaking to a naval officer who said that there are probably a lot of spouses who are on bases overseas in places like Japan or Germany or Italy, who are probably on their way back to the U.S. right now to make sure that they can have their kids in the U.S. to guarantee that they will become U.S. citizens. And this policy is meant to go into effect on October 29th. Fred.
Right. And while people may think that's a small number, 100 per year, if you're one of that 100, I mean, it doesn't matter the volume of which it still impacts you very greatly, and it's very worrisome. Alex Marquardt, thank you so much. A nationwide manhunt underway right now for 2 escaped murder suspects. Coming up, how they got away and where they might be headed. A disturbing plot to kill college students disrupted by police. Police arresting a student who admitted to planning a mass shooting at High Point University in North Carolina. Officers charged the 19-year-old freshman with 2 felony counts of having a gun on campus and making threats of mass violence after a classmate reported him. CNN's Martin Savage has the latest.
Frederica, 19-year-old Paul Stieber has been charged with 2 counts of having a gun on educational property. He actually had 2 weapons and communicating a threat of mass violence. The positive here is that this appears to be a potential mass killing that was averted thanks to the involvement of students at High Point University, as well as faculty and administration here who notified the authorities. This young man, who was a freshman, had only been on campus less than 2 weeks, but he had already started the preparations. Authorities say that he actually told them he'd begun thinking about this last December. But last weekend, he actually went out and purchased 2 weapons, a 9mm handgun and a double-barrel shotgun. In fact, he told authorities that the reason he went to school in North Carolina would be that it was easier for him, he believed, to purchase firearms in that state than it would be back in his home state of Massachusetts. On top of that, authorities say that he also had been reviewing and looking at videos from other mass killings, including Charleston, South Carolina, apparently to learn what to do and what not to do. And that as far as motivation going on in his mind, 2 things. Authorities say he told them that he was, quote, not going to be an outcast any longer, and also that he had been rushing for a fraternity on campus there, and apparently he told authorities that if his roommate was accepted but he was not, it would be some kind of trigger event, and he would kill his roommate, kill himself, and possibly harm others in that whole process there. He has been expelled from the school, and right now he has not been granted any kind of bond. He is expected to undergo a psychological evaluation. But again, this goes back to if you see something, say something, and on a campus in High Point there, they did see something, and thankfully it appears tragedy has been averted. Frederica?
Wow, incredibly frightening. Martin Savage, thank you so much. Meantime, a manhunt is underway right now for a married couple who overpowered 2 security officers during a prisoner transport in Utah, and they're still on the run. They were being moved to face charges in connection with the death of a 72-year-old man in Tucson, Arizona. CNN's Dan Simon has more.
Wanted for murder, these 2 suspects, a husband and wife, are on the run after overpowering the security guards transporting them across the country.